It's the 365th day. You arrived in Bruges as a runaway serf legally bound to a lord's land. You've survived here, you've worked, you've learned a trade, and you've lived in the shadows. Today marks 1 year and 1 day since you arrived. The law is clear. The moment this day ends, you're free. Not a serf anymore, not property, but a citizen. This is the story of medieval free cities, a revolutionary idea that began in Flanders in the 11th century and spread across Europe. Places where ordinary people governed themselves collectively, where craftspeople seized political power, where communities created institutions that distributed power rather than concentrated it. We're talking about organized labor, democratic institutions, and a political system that influenced how governments worked for the next 800 years. Let's start with the most basic question. What actually was a medieval free city? Chapter 1. The idea that started it all. The Flemish phrase was simple. Stadslucht maakt vrij. Town air makes you free. If you were a serf and you reached a medieval city, you had a pathway to freedom. The exact terms varied by place and time, but many cities offered legal protection to fugitive serfs who established residence. Once you were inside the city, the lord who owned you couldn't legally drag you back. But that principle came from Flanders. In the 11th century, Flemish cities like Bruges began experimenting with something new. They created sworn associations called communes. Urban residents took oaths, binding them to each other and to the community. These communes became legal bodies that could own property, hold courts, make ordinances, and collect taxes. The city itself became a legal entity separate from the lord. The commune could negotiate with the lord from a position of strength and write down its rights in a charter. Bruges' commune developed gradually through the early 12th century. Count Charles the Good's murder in 1127 formalized communal structures. Ghent and Ypres followed. Within a few generations, virtually every significant city in Flanders had a commune and a charter. They had created a model that worked. Then cities across Europe started watching. They saw what Flanders had created and they started copying it. But they didn't just copy, they adapted it, and many of them made it work better than Flanders ever could. Why? Well, geography and politics. Chapter 2. How the model spread and took root. Flanders was under the thumb of powerful centralized authorities. The counts of Flanders answered to the kings of France. The French crown wanted order, revenue, and control, so even as Flanders pioneered the commune system, that system was being gradually constrained by external pressures. In the Holy Roman Empire, things were different. The emperor was weak and far away. Power was fragmented among countless local princes. No single authority could force all cities to submit completely. Cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, Strasbourg, and Cologne looked at what Flanders had created and understood something crucial. They could keep the freedom that Flanders was losing. Lübeck on the Baltic coast obtained recognition of its autonomy through charters beginning in the 12th century. The Charter of 1226 formalized this autonomy. The city controlled its own courts, militia, and trade policy. The emperor was too far away to enforce control the way the French king did, but Lübeck became so powerful that it founded the Hanseatic League, a confederation of nearly 200 free cities stretching from Estonia to the Netherlands with trading posts in London, Bergen, Bruges, and Novgorod. Strasbourg accumulated significant autonomy through the 13th and 14th centuries. The bishop nominally held authority, but guild organizations controlled practical governance. The city minted its own money, conducted its own foreign policy, raised its own militia, and negotiated treaties that reflected genuine independence. Cologne defeated the archbishop's forces in the Battle of Waringen in 1288. This removed immediate interference and allowed the city to develop its own institutions. It became one of the most powerful free cities in the empire, controlling the Rhine trade with its own money and army. These cities took the Flemish model and pushed it further because the Holy Roman Empire's fragmented nature gave them room to maneuver. Flanders created the original idea. The Holy Roman Empire cities made it work on a larger scale with more genuine autonomy. Chapter 3: How cities governed themselves. Different cities adapted the model to their own circumstances, but the core remained the same. A free city governed itself collectively through councils that included representatives from different groups. These councils made laws called ordinances, decided how to spend money, determined what trades were allowed and where, and appointed magistrates called aldermen who administered the city's day-to-day business. In a feudal system, the lord made the decisions. His word was law. In a free city, decisions came from collective discussion. If merchants wanted to change a tax, they had to convince the council. If craftspeople wanted to regulate trade, they had to convince the council. Power came from negotiation rather than individual authority. The people who served on councils weren't professionals. They were merchants, craftspeople, and ordinary people who did this work while also running their own businesses. A weaver might serve 1 year and then return to his loom. A merchant might serve for several years. Governing your own city was something ordinary people could do. Craft guilds were fundamental to how this actually functioned, especially in the Holy Roman Empire cities where they became the organizing principle of urban governance. A guild was an organization of people who practiced the same trade, so think weavers, smiths, tanners, bakers, and dozens of others depending on the city's economy. Guilds regulated their trades by setting standards for quality, setting prices, controlling how many people could practice, and requiring apprentices to undergo years of training before becoming masters. They provided social support through common funds that covered illness, widows, orphans, funerals, and religious observances. The guild was like an extended family. Most importantly, guilds became political. In many cities, guild members became the city council. Guild leaders became aldermen. Guilds controlled how much money the city spent, imposed regulations on other guilds, and made decisions affecting the entire city. But there was a downside. Guilds limited membership. Once a guild had secured good conditions and good wages, its members prevented new people from joining. They accepted only their own sons as apprentices, made apprenticeships expensive, and created rules that made it nearly impossible for outsiders to become masters. By the way, there are still some protected professions in Belgium that follow rules like this. By the 14th century, wage workers vastly outnumbered guild members. Wage workers had no say in governance. Guild members had all the power. Eventually, this led to strikes and revolts. Chapter 4: What daily life actually looked like. Medieval free cities were densely packed. Thousands of people lived in a relatively small area. The physical layout reflected social organization and economic function. Tanners and dyers lived on city edges because their work created terrible smells. Leather workers, shoemakers, and other craftspeople processing animal hides worked in adjacent areas. Metal workers and butchers stayed closer to city centers. Weavers, goldsmiths, and silversmiths operated along main streets where wealthy people gathered. Housing depended entirely on wealth. Wealthy merchants lived in stone houses with multiple stories, glass windows, and multiple rooms. Poorer residents lived in wooden structures, often rented, with single large rooms where entire families slept. Sanitation was a constant problem with human waste, animal waste, and food scraps accumulating in the streets. Water was generally unsafe. Medieval urbanites understood this and didn't drink water straight. They drank beer or wine. Even children received watered wine instead of water or milk. It was a practical response to contamination. Boiling water in beer production killed pathogens. Daily markets provided food, textiles, and household goods. Periodic fairs lasting a few days brought exotic merchandise. Think spices, waxes, fine fabrics, farm implements, and such. Urban streets prohibited weapons in common areas. You could own a sword, but you couldn't carry it openly in the marketplace or main street. This created what historians call a weaponless public sphere. Conflict had to be resolved through words and ideas rather than violence. I want to pause here and ask you to support the channel. If you are interested in medieval history, please like and subscribe to stay up to date on newer videos. Thank you so much. Chapter 5: Culture and the Historical Record. Many free cities developed distinctive cultural lives. Performances happened regularly in public spaces. In Arras, a Franco-Flemish city, playwrights wrote plays performed in streets and market squares. Jehan Bodel wrote plays in the late 12th century that became famous across Europe. Adam de la Halle wrote plays mixing narrative with dancing and music. Plays explored moral questions. Poetry criticized particular people or policies. Public processions made political statements. All in all, citizens engaged with their own governance through cultural performances. We know so much about medieval cities because medieval people wrote about them extensively. Galbert of Bruges, a notary, witnessed significant events and recorded them in detail. His chronicle provides intimate descriptions of urban life, social hierarchies, and how different groups interacted. Around 1127, Galbert documented the assassination of Count Charles the Good. His account captures how the murder's political shockwaves moved through the city, how different social groups mobilized, and how ordinary people gathered to debate what would happen next. This is one of the most vivid contemporary accounts of medieval urban life. Jean Froissart documented urban conflicts and governance in the late medieval Low Countries. Giovanni Villani recorded statistics about his city of Florence, including population data, ordinances, and commerce information. These weren't outside observers, they were people who lived through these systems and understood what made their cities different from the countryside. Their accounts let us see medieval cities as lived places where real people made decisions about their own lives. Chapter 6: Why This Matters. Medieval free cities proved that ordinary people could govern themselves effectively. They could make collective decisions through councils, resolve conflicts through institutions rather than violence, and create laws that bound everyone, including rulers. And they could do this at significant scale. An idea that began in Flanders spread across Europe and took root particularly strongly in the decentralized Holy Roman Empire, where cities like Strasbourg and Cologne proved it could work on an even larger scale. That model matters now because it showed that ordinary people could seize control over their own circumstances, that power could be distributed rather than concentrated, that communities could create institutions reflecting their values and interests. We live in an era where many people feel excluded from power and voiceless in institutions affecting their own lives. Medieval cities faced exactly these problems and solved them by building institutions where multiple groups had to negotiate with each other. Serfs became free citizens. Craftspeople seized political power from merchant elites. Workers organized and demanded representation. They didn't wait for someone to grant them freedom. They negotiated for it. They fought for it. They built the institutions to make it real. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find my sources below, and see you in the next one.